Hi, everybody. I wanted to talk a little bit about our course material here, and specifically about what we're moving from in week 2 and into in week 3. Hope everybody is settling into the course and has already learned a lot about social media. We'll continue at a pretty intensive pace this summer for the next several weeks. But in week 2, of course, we were looking at, let me find my mouse here. Let's see. All right, so in week 2, we were finishing off our discussion about mobile technology, about the hardware that increasingly determines and shapes the ways that we interact with one another through social media. And then at the end of the week, with MySpace and Facebook 101, we started talking about what's by far the most successful social media platform on earth ever, and that, of course, is Facebook. So just to give you a sense of, in terms of active users, where Facebook is in the world today. As this chart shows, Facebook's at the top with close to 1.6 billion active users. WhatsApp is second with about a billion, and then Facebook Messenger is third, also obviously owned by Mark Zuckerberg and his company. About 900 million people use Facebook Messenger on a daily or on a regular basis at least. WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger are both texting services, so they're not quite as rich or as profitable yet as social media sites like Facebook are. And then after that, QQ, WeChat, and Qzone are all Chinese companies, and we'll be talking more about that later. But you can see here that things like Twitter and Skype and Snapchat, while quite profitable and quite popular, are nowhere near in the sort of unique position that Facebook is. Okay, so we're starting our discussion of Facebook. We'll continue talking about it next week in week 3 by focusing on the business model of Facebook, how it fits within the world, specifically by looking at the largest country in the world, China, and the desperate, I think is a fair word, efforts of Zuckerberg and his company to break into the Chinese market. Zuckerberg's learning Chinese, for example, and has been for several years now. After that, after looking at the business model in China, we'll turn to Facebook versus reality and catfish and start looking more intensively at some of the impact of Facebook on the way that we interact with other people and with our communities. So looking forward to next week, let me just talk a little bit more about, for example, Facebook Business. Facebook's not as fashionable as it was even just a few years ago. The cool kids don't turn to Facebook immediately or don't think of it as their home in the way that they used to. But that doesn't mean that its influence in our society has declined. If anything, it's the reverse. And it doesn't mean that Facebook is in any sense stagnated. It's continued to change quite rapidly. And what this assignment focuses on is 2 major changes that have happened at the company within the last 5 years or so. The first is that Facebook has gone public, meaning that it's invited other people to buy a chunk of the company. It's selling stock on the New York Stock Exchange now. And that has had radical impacts on the way that the company functions. It's not just the founders anymore who need to be pleased by what happens at the company, but lots and lots of people who bought the company stock as an investment, and they expect that company to be profitable and to be increasingly profitable from here on out. So it's made the bottom line much more prominent and in some ways much more controversial for Facebook in the 6 years since they've become a public company. So their business model is, of course, selling, as it says here, advertising targeted at users based on intimate knowledge of their profiles and their activities. So selling advertising targeted at users based on intimate knowledge of their profiles and activities. And it's important to remember when you're on Facebook that you're not their customer. You're in fact their product. Their customers are the large corporations that buy advertising space. And of course, those large corporations are what they're buying from Facebook is the attention of the millions of users who are on the site every day. In other words, you and me. There's a little cartoon, the perspective of two pigs. One says, "Isn't it great? We don't have to pay anything for the barn." "Yeah, and even the food is free," says the second pig. And this cartoon has been associated with Facebook in a couple places on the web. And it's a nice reminder that if you aren't paying for the product, then you very likely are the product. And that's certainly true of social media sites like Facebook. They are free for us because what the business is actually selling is our attention. And they're selling it to Ford, they're selling it to Nike, they're selling it to the large corporations that are trying to get into our heads. That's an advertising-based model. So that has made that turn toward a publicly owned company has made the business of Facebook much more central to everything that they do. But secondly, as Zuckerberg himself said, they abruptly became, around 2010, a mobile company, following the shift that all of us have been making over the past several years. So even though we call them phones, what those things are in our pockets and our purses are really computers. And because we have started carrying our computers around with us, they've been very quickly much more thoroughly integrated into our lives. And they know and are able to share much more information about us than the computers that just sat on our desks at work ever could. So we interact with them much more intimately now. We talk to them. Sometimes they talk to us. But most importantly, probably, is that we take them everywhere we go. So our computers know where we are at every second of the day now. And as it happens, that information is very, very interesting to companies like Nike and Ford and lots of other corporate advertisers. So Facebook has abruptly become a mobile company, and that's dramatically changed what they are, what the site is, and how it works as well. So that's what this assignment is all about. So China has blocked Facebook now for several years, and they are very busy trying to create homegrown versions of the site, which is a major impediment to Facebook's vision of itself as sort of the operating system of the 21st century. They want to become integral to computing and computers everywhere. Many people learn from Microsoft that that's a very, very powerful and profitable place to be. So as I said earlier, Facebook has worked very hard to get into China, but of course those efforts by American companies to tap Chinese markets come with all sorts of frictions, mostly related to different standards of political freedom. So Google finally left China, for example, because they weren't willing to censor their results and communicate with the Chinese government about their users in the way that the Chinese government insisted that they do. So because the United States is only a very small corner of the world, it's important to remember that when we're talking about social media, we're talking about much more than just the 5% of the world that is American. So that assignment's about Facebook and China. Facebook versus reality. We're reading an article by a man named Paul Miller, who did something that a lot of us sometimes fantasize about, and unplugged for a year from the internet. And the article called "I'm Still Here" on TheVerge.com is him talking about what he learned from that year of being completely cut off from any kind of online activity. So hopefully that will help all of us think a bit more and spark some discussions about exactly what the internet in general and social media more specifically does for us and to us. And we'll continue that conversation in week 3. Then finally, there's a film that I'm asking everybody to watch. It's called Catfish. It's streaming from Swank. Swank is available through Galileo. So if you log into Galileo and follow these links, then you'll be able to stream Catfish for free. It is the film. There's also a television show that came out, I think, on the MTV network a few years ago. But this is the 90-minute or so documentary that sparked the television show, directed by Henry Joost and Ariel Schulman. So that is the film that you need to watch. It might be a good idea to read over these objectives and think about these questions as you're watching the film. If you do that, then you'll have a good grasp of the kinds of things that I think this film can teach us about social media. So that's a whirlwind tour of sort of last week and this week. It's a shift from hardware, talking about mobile media, to this first and in many ways most important social media site, Facebook. If anybody has any questions or other issues, please send me an email. I'll be traveling next week, but I'll be on email quite frequently. So let me know what's going on. Thanks.